The galaxy had seen many species rise from their home worlds and reach for the stars. Some were brilliant, some were terrifying, some were ancient beyond counting, but none of them not a single one in 4 billion years of recorded galactic history had confused the elder races quite like the humans of Sol 3. They arrived without warning one day. The outer sensor nets of the Galactic Concord picked up a small, ugly ship crawling out of an unremarkable yellow star system on the far edge of the Orion arm. The ship was slow, it was leaking radiation. Its hull was made of metal so crude that the Vrethki Border Patrol thought it was a piece of space debris at first, but it carried a crew of living beings, soft, fleshy, warm-blooded mammals with no claws, no armor, no venom, no telepathy, and no natural weapons of any kind. They called themselves humans. They came from a planet called Earth, Class 12 death world, where the gravity was punishing, the atmosphere was corrosive, the weather was violent, and nearly every living thing on the surface had spent millions of years trying to eat everything else. The Concord had 4,200 member species at the time. The youngest of them had been spacefaring for over 1,000 years. The eldest, the 12 who sat on the high conclave and governed all of known space, had been among the stars for so long that they had forgotten what their home worlds even looked like. Humans were given a seat, a small one. The Concord welcomed all spacefaring species, no matter how primitive. It was the law, so humanity signed the charter, accepted the rules, and joined the galactic community as its newest and most unremarkable member. For the first few years, nobody paid them much attention. They were a curiosity. Ambassadors from the elder races would visit the human delegation at galactic summits and ask polite questions, the way one might ask a child about their drawings. The humans smiled and answered and nodded and said, "Thank you." They were agreeable, they were friendly, they were harmless. Or so everyone thought. The first sign that something was different about the humans came from the trade routes. Conquered space was vast, and the hyperspace lanes that connected its many worlds were governed by strict right-of-way treaties. Disputes over lane access were common, and they were usually settled through slow negotiation, or if necessary through the rights of dominion. The Concord's ancient regulated system of warfare. The rights were civilized. 2 species would declare a grievance, agree on the terms of battle, send their fleets to an approved combat zone and fight until one side surrendered or was destroyed. There were rules, there were observers, there was honor. It was how the galaxy had settled its conflicts for millennia, and it worked. Humans had no fleet to speak of, so they could not invoke the rights, but they did have trade ships, and those trade ships kept showing up in places they shouldn't have been flying through contested lanes, dodging patrols, and somehow impossibly outrunning military corvettes that were 10 times faster on paper. The Vrethki were the first to complain. They were a proud warrior species, 6-limbed, armored in natural bone-like chitin, with a fleet of over 30,000 warships. They had ruled the Concords' military rankings for centuries, and they did not appreciate human cargo haulers weaving through their patrol lines like it was a game. Their ships are garbage, the Vrethki military commander told the conclave. Slow, poorly armed, barely shielded. But their pilots fly as if they have no fear of death. It is irritating. Then came the reports from the frontier colonies. The conquered rated planets on a habitability scale from Class 1 to Class 15, with anything above Class 10 considered a death trap. Most species refused to settle anything above Class 6. Humans, however, had begun colonizing worlds rated Class 9, Class 10 even. Class 11, they built cities in places where the air burned the lungs and the ground shook every day. They farmed soil that was more poison than dirt. They thrived. When asked how they managed it, the human colonial governor of a Class 11 world just shrugged and said, "It's not that bad. You should see Australia." Nobody knew what Australia was. Nobody asked. But the moment that truly alarmed the elder races came in the 58th year of human membership, when the Terran embassy submitted a formal application to participate in the rights of dominion. It was a simple request, polite, professional, filed through all the proper channels. The humans wanted the same right as every other conquered species, the right to settle disputes through sanctioned warfare. The request reached the High Conclave of 12, and for the first time in over 600 years, the 12 called an emergency closed session. No observers, no records, no transcripts. What happened in that room was never made public, but 3 of the 12, the Alundri, the Vrethki, and the Dominion of Cathar, were said to have argued for hours. The Alundri Foresight Bureau, secretive intelligence organization, known for their telepathic analysts and predictive modeling, had compiled a classified file on humanity years earlier. They presented it to the conclave behind sealed doors. The file was titled simply, "Threat Assessment Saw 3, Do Not Engage." Nobody outside the conclave ever saw its contents, but whatever was in that file changed everything. 2 days later, the conclave announced a new amendment to the Galactic Concord Charter, Amendment 4717. The galaxy would come to know it by another name, the Terran Clause. It was short and absolute. Humans were permanently banned from all sanctioned warfare. They could not invoke the rights of dominion. They could not build a military fleet. They could not engage in organized combat with any conquered member species. The official reason was simple: humans were too young, too culturally immature, too new to the galaxy. They needed more time to learn the ways of civilized species. The Terran ambassador at the time, a tall, quiet woman named Adiz Akefer, read the amendment in full. She did not shout, she did not protest. She looked at the assembled representatives of 4,000 species and said, "We understand." Then she signed it. Humanity had no choice. They were one species against thousands. They had no fleet, no allies, and no leverage. Fighting the amendment would have meant expulsion from the conquered and isolation in a galaxy that was vast, cold, and full of things far older and far more powerful than them. So they accepted. They smiled. They went back to their trade routes and their death world colonies and their ugly little ships. They attended every summit. They signed every treaty. They were polite, cooperative, and completely unremarkable. 60 years passed. The galaxy moved on. New disputes arose. New rights were fought. New species rose and fell. The Terran Clause became a footnote, a minor piece of bureaucratic history that most species forgot entirely. And that was exactly what the humans were counting on. Because deep inside the Sol system, far from the sensor nets of the conquered, far from the eyes of the Alundri, and The patrols of the Vrethki, something was being built, quietly, patiently, piece by piece, year by year, in the dark and the silence. The galaxy had told humanity it could never go to war. Humanity heard something very different. It heard, get ready. Beyond the borders of conquered space, past the last charted star systems in the farthest colonial outposts, there was a region the elder races called the Outer Veil. It was a wall of empty space, no stars, no planets, no resources, no reason for anyone to go. There it had been quiet for as long as anyone could remember, millions of years of silence and endless black nothing. Until it wasn't. The first warning came from a Vrethki listening post on the edge of the frontier. A single automated sensor station picked up something moving through the veil, something massive, something that shouldn't have been there. The signal was strange. It didn't match any known ship design, any known energy signature, any known species. The station transmitted its data back to Vrethki command, and then it went dark. 3 hours later, every sensor station along the outer veil went dark too. The Vrethki sent a patrol fleet to investigate. 12 warships crewed by veterans armed with the finest weapons the hegemony could build. They jumped to the last known coordinates of the listening post and found nothing, no debris, no wreckage, no trace that the station had ever existed. Then they looked deeper into the veil and saw what was coming. It stretched across the void like a living storm, millions of shapes each, one different from the last, some as small as fighters, some as large as moons. They moved together in a pattern that was not quite formation and not quite chaos. They pulsed with a dark, oily light that made the sensors scream, and they were fast, faster than anything that size had any right to be. The patrol fleet fired every weapon, every missile, every beam they had. The shapes absorbed it all. They didn't dodge, they didn't shield, they simply took the hits and kept coming, and then they fired back. The patrol fleet lasted 9 minutes. The Vrethki hegemony mobilized everything, every warship, every reserve, every retired captain called back to duty. They assembled the largest fleet they had ever gathered, 8,000 vessels, and sent it to meet the enemy at the frontier. The battle lasted 2 days. The Vrethki fought with everything they had. They were warriors. They had been warriors for 10,000 years. They knew how to fight, how to hold a line, how to die with honor. But this enemy did not care about honor. It did not care about lines. It did not even seem to care about winning, not in the way that any known species understood victory. It simply consumed. It ate ships, it ate stations, it ate planets. It broke things apart at the molecular level and absorbed them into itself, growing larger, growing stronger, growing smarter with every piece it swallowed. The conquered gave it a name, the Kefi Swarm, but that name was too clean, too simple for what it really was. It was not an army. It was not an invasion force. It was a hunger given form, and it had been drifting between galaxies for longer than most civilizations had existed. The Vrethki lost 4,000 ships in 2 days. The survivors retreated in disorder, broadcasting distress calls on every frequency. Panic hit the conquered like a wave. Emergency sessions were called. The High Conclave of 12 met in open session for the first time in decades. Representatives from every member species crowded into the Grand Assembly. Hall on the Capitol Station, shouting over each other, demanding answers, demanding action. The Vrethki military commander stood before the assembly, his Titan cracked and scorched from battle, and delivered his report. His voice did not shake, but his eyes were hollow. It adapts, he said. Every weapon we used, it learned to counter within hours. Every tactic we tried, it predicted within minutes. It does not communicate. It does not negotiate. It does not stop. We hit it with everything we had, and it ate our fleet like it was nothing. The hall went silent. 4 of the elder races, the Vrethki, the Aelandri, the Dominion of Cathar, and the Sithari Collective, agreed to form a joint defense force. Together, they assembled a combined fleet of over 40,000 warships. It was the largest military force ever gathered in galactic history. They positioned it at the Myrales corridor, a narrow passage in hyperspace that the swarm would have to pass through to reach the inner systems of the Conquered. The plan was simple: hold the corridor, concentrate fire, use the choke point to neutralize the swarm's advantage in numbers. It should have worked. On paper it was flawless. 40,000 ships, 4 elder civilizations, the greatest military minds in the galaxy, against any known enemy. It would have been more than enough. The Battle of Myrales began at dawn, Galactic Standard Time. It ended 11 hours later. The swarm poured through the corridor like water through a crack. It adapted to energy weapons in the first hour. It adapted to missile barrages in the second. By the 4th hour it had learned to mimic Conquered shield frequencies and pass through them like they weren't there. By the 8th hour the combined fleet was in full retreat. By the 11th hour it was gone. 40,000 ships, millions of crew, 4 civilizations worth of military power shattered in less than half a day. The survivors carried stories that spread across the Conquered like fire. Stories of ships being pulled apart by tendrils of living metal. Stories of escape pods being swallowed whole. Stories of the swarm growing visibly larger after every ship it consumed, turning the wreckage of the fallen into new weapons, new bodies, new hunger. The galaxy had never known fear like this. Not in 4 billion years. There had been wars, terrible ones. There had been plagues and disasters and collapses, but there had never been something that simply could not be stopped. The Cephe swarm did not slow down after Myrales. It kept moving inward, consuming everything in its path. Colony, worlds, mining stations, trade hubs. Gone, all gone. The swarm left nothing behind. Not ruins, not wreckage, not even dust. Just empty space where life had been. The High Conclave met again, and this time the arrogance was gone. The pride was gone. The elder races, the ancient, the powerful, the wise, sat in their seats and faced a truth that none of them wanted to speak aloud. They were losing, and they had nothing left to throw at the enemy. It was the Aelandri representative who spoke first. She was old even by Aelandri standards, and her telepathic presence filled the room with a cold, heavy weight. She looked at her colleagues on the conclave and said the words that everyone was thinking and nobody wanted to say. There is one species we have not asked. The room went very still. They were forbidden from warfare by our own law, she continued. We told them they were too dangerous, too unpredictable, too young. We sealed them behind a clause in our charter and told ourselves it was for the best. She paused. Perhaps it is time we admitted that we were not protecting them. We were protecting ourselves, and now we need exactly what we were afraid of. The vote was unanimous. A formal transmission was sent to Terra, Sol system, requesting advisory consultation in the matter of the HFY swarm on Earth in the Terran embassy building overlooking the city of Lagos. Ambassador Adiz Okafor received the message. She read it once slowly, then she read it again. She set it down on her desk and looked at her staff, a room full of people who had spent their careers smiling politely while the galaxy treated their species like children. They're not asking for advice, Okafor said quietly. They're asking for help. They just can't bring themselves to say it. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city below. Millions of people living their lives, unaware that something was eating the galaxy alive and heading their way. Then she picked up a secure comm unit and called the one number she had hoped she would never have to use. "This is Ambassador Okafor," she said. "Authorization code Fenris Actual. Wake them up." On the other end of the line, deep beneath the frozen surface of Europa, light turned on in a room that had been dark for 60 years, and somewhere in the black silence of the Uit cloud, something vast and patient began to stir. The galaxy believed that humanity had no military. It was a reasonable belief. The Terran clause had banned them from warfare. They had no warships registered with the conquered. They had no weapons platforms, no military academies, no standing army. Every inspection team that the conquered had ever sent to the Sol system had found the same thing: peaceful, cooperative species focused on trade, science, and colonial expansion. The inspectors were not wrong. They simply did not look hard enough. And the humans had made very, very sure of that. Ambassador Okafor's call set something in motion that had been waiting for 60 years, not waiting idly, waiting the way a coiled spring waits, the way a held breath waits, the way a loaded weapon waits. Humanity had obeyed the letter of the Terran clause. They had not built a military fleet. They had not engaged in warfare. They had not broken a single law. But the clause had said nothing about defense. It had said nothing about research, and it had said nothing about preparation. Within hours of Okafor's authorization, the Sol system began to change. On Luna, the great shipyards that had publicly built cargo freighters and mining vessels for 6 decades began to reconfigure. Enormous bay doors that hadn't opened in years slid apart, revealing dry docks that went deep beneath the lunar surface. Inside those docks, hidden from every sensor and every inspection, sat warships. Not just a few thousands. The Fenris fleet, 12,000 vessels built in secret across 60 years. Each one was designed from the ground up for a single purpose: to kill anything that threatened humanity, no matter what it was, no matter how powerful, no matter how advanced. They were not beautiful ships. Concord's warships were elegant, smooth, curved, designed as much for appearance as for function. The elder races believed that a warship should reflect the dignity of the civilization that built it. Terran warships reflected something else entirely. They were blocky, angular, and covered in layered armor so thick it doubled their mass. Every surface bristled with weapons, missile tubes, kinetic cannons, energy projectors, point defense turrets. They had redundant systems for everything, 2 bridges, 3 engine cores, 4 separate life support networks. They were built on a principle that no conquered engineer would have ever considered acceptable, the assumption that the ship would take catastrophic damage and need to keep fighting anyway. A Vrethki warship that lost its primary bridge was dead. A Terran warship that lost its primary bridge simply switched to the backup and kept shooting. On Mars, the War College came alive. For 60 years, it had operated under the official cover of the Terran Institute for Strategic Studies, a think tank that published papers on trade policy and colonial logistics. In reality, it was the most advanced military academy in the galaxy, and it had spent every one of those 60 years doing something that no other species had ever thought to do. It had studied war itself, not the rights of dominion, not the civilized, rules-bound, honor-coded conflicts of the conquered, real war, total war. The kind of war where there were no rules, no observers, no surrender terms, and no second chances. The Mars War College had run millions of simulations. It had studied every conflict in human history, from Stone Age tribal battles to the great wars of the 20th century, to the quiet, brutal insurgencies of the 21st. It had also studied every known conquered conflict and found them laughably predictable. And then, because humans were humans, it had begun studying conflicts that hadn't happened yet, theoretical wars against theoretical enemies with theoretical capabilities. One of those theoretical enemies was a self-replicating, adaptive swarm intelligence that consumed everything in its path. The simulation had been designated Scenario Keffieh. It had been written 34 years ago. Deep in the Uit cloud, the vast frozen shell of debris that surrounded the Sol system, the final piece of humanity's hidden arsenal, woke up. Project Jericho, a network of weapons platforms scattered across billions of kilometers of empty space, each one carrying a payload that the conquered had banned centuries before humanity had even left Earth. Relativistic kill vehicles, chunks of dense metal accelerated to a significant fraction of the speed of light. At those speeds, a piece of iron the size of a car carried more energy than a nuclear bomb. The conquered considered such weapons barbaric, indiscriminate, and beneath any civilized species. Humans had built 600 of them. Within 72 hours of Akoffer's call, the Fenris fleet was fueled, armed, and crewed. Reservists who had lived their entire adult lives as farmers, engineers, teachers, and shopkeepers reported to their assigned ships and put on uniforms they had kept folded in the backs of their closets for decades. They had trained in secret one weekend month in facilities disguised as recreational centers and corporate retreats. They were ready. They had always been ready. Fleet Admiral Kofi Asant took command. Aboard the flagship, a massive dreadnought named the TDS Remember Everything. The name was not poetic, it was a statement of principle. Humanity remembered every slight, every insult, every pat on the head from species that treated them like pets. They remembered being told they were too primitive, too emotional, too dangerous. They remembered the Terran clause and the closed-door meeting that created it. And now they remembered why they had spent 60 years building in the dark. But before a single ship moved, Ambassador Akoffer addressed the high conclave. She appeared on the quantum Link broadcast that connected every government in the conquered, and she spoke calmly, clearly, and without anger. 60 years ago, the conclave passed Amendment 4717 and told humanity that it was not allowed to fight. We accepted that decision. We followed your laws. We respected your authority. She paused. Now the galaxy faces an enemy that your combined fleets could not stop, an enemy that is eating your worlds and killing your people. And you have come to us. The species you said was too dangerous to be trusted and asked for our help. She let the silence hang for a moment. The Terran Defense Cooperative is prepared to deploy its full strength. Against the Kefi swarm, we will fight. For the conquered, we will fight for every species that is threatened, but we will not do it under the shadow of a law that calls us unworthy. Her eyes were steady, her voice did not rise. We ask for one thing, the permanent repeal of Amendment 4717. Not because we need your permission to do what must be done, but because the galaxy should see clearly what it is asking for and make that choice with open eyes. The conclave did not debate, they did not argue, they did not even pause to consider the implications. They had seen the swarm consume entire worlds. They had watched 40,000 of their finest warships burn. They had no pride left. The vote was unanimous. The Terran clause was repealed. On the bridge of the Remember Everything, Admiral Assant received the confirmation. He stood in front of the main viewport, looking out at the assembled fleet. 12,000 warships stretching across the dark in every direction. They're running, lights glowing like a field of angry stars. He opened a channel to every ship, every captain, every crew member, every soldier who had waited a lifetime for this moment. This is Fleet Admiral Assant, he said. His voice was low, calm, and absolutely certain. Fenris fleet is cleared for deployment. All ships, all weapons, all doctrine. We are going to the front. We are going to find this swarm, and we are going to show the galaxy what happens when you give humanity a reason to fight. He took a breath. Weapons free, show them why. 12,000 engines fired at once. The light of their departure was visible from Earth with the naked eye, a brief, brilliant flare across the night sky, like a second sunrise that lasted only a moment and then was gone. The wolves were awake, and they were hungry. The conquered surviving military commanders were given seats aboard the Terran flagship. It was not a gesture of friendship, it was a calculation. Admiral Assant wanted witnesses. He wanted every species in the galaxy to see what was about to happen, not through filtered reports or second-hand accounts, but through the eyes of their own officers. The Vrethki sent Commander Torvon, a veteran of the Battle of Myres, who had lost half his fleet and still carried the scars across his chitin. The Elandri sent a telepathic observer named Salith, who could transmit her sensory experience directly to the conclave in real time. The Dominion of Koth sent a tactical analyst. The Sithari sent a fleet coordinator. They arrived on the bridge of the Remember Everything, expecting something familiar, a command center like their own, ordered, hierarchical. What they found was something else. The Terran bridge was loud. Officers shouted across the room. Data streams covered every wall. Multiple conversations happened at once, overlapping, interrupting, correcting each other in real time. There was no Ritual, no ceremony, no moment of silence before battle, just noise, motion, and a controlled chaos that looked to conquered eyes like madness. Commander Torvin watched a young human officer argue with her superior about a targeting solution, saw the superior change his mind mid-sentence and adopt her suggestion, and felt something cold settle in his stomach. In the Vretki military, questioning a superior's order was grounds for execution. Here it was Tuesday. The Fenris fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the swarms. Advance, a region that had once been the Vretki colony world of Ethnar 7. The planet was gone, not destroyed, not burned, simply gone. The swarm had consumed it down to its core and left nothing but a dark smear in space where a living world had been. Admiral Ascent did not pause to survey the destruction. He did not deliver a speech. He did not issue a challenge or open a communication channel. He looked at his tactical officer and said one word: begin. The Fenris fleet attacked from 9 directions at once. There was no formation, no battle line, no elegant approach vector. Terran warships dove into the swarm like a pack of wolves hitting a herd, each ship operating with independent authority to engage targets of opportunity while maintaining coordination through network of AI-assisted tactical links. They hit the swarm from above, below, behind, and inside. They split into groups of 3, then reformed into groups of 50, then split again. They never stayed in the same pattern. For more than 10 minutes, the conquered observers watched in stunned silence. Every species in the galaxy fought the same way. You formed a line, you advanced, you fired, you held your position, or you retreated. War was geometry, angles, distances, fields of fire. It had been this way for millennia, and every species understood the logic. The Terrans did not fight with geometry. They fought with psychology. Their opening barrage was a wall of energy weapons, beams, pulses, plasma bursts fired at maximum power across the widest possible front. The swarm absorbed it, analyzed it, and began to adapt. Within 40 minutes it had developed countermeasures that reduced Terran energy weapons to half their effectiveness. This was exactly what Asan expected. The moment the swarm adapted, the Terrans switched. Every ship in the fleet cut its energy weapons and opened up with kinetic cannons, rail guns that fired slugs of dense metal at enormous speed. No energy signature, no frequency to analyze, just raw physical force, slamming into the swarm at thousands of rounds per minute. The swarm staggered. It had built its countermeasures for energy weapons, and now the Terrans were throwing rocks. It took the swarm almost an hour to begin adapting to the kinetics, growing thicker armor, denser structures, harder shells. The Terrans switched again. This time they used chemical weapons, warheads filled with corrosive compounds, biological agents, and reactive substances so old-fashioned that the swarm had no evolutionary framework to counter them. Acid that ate through biomechanical tissue, oxidizers that turned organic components to powder, thermite charges that burned at temperatures hot enough to melt starship hulls. Salith, the Alundri telepath, was broadcasting everything she witnessed directly to the conclave. Across the galaxy, the leaders of 4,000 civilizations watched through her eyes as the Terrans systematically cycled through every category of weapon ever invented by any species in history, and several that no species had thought to invent because they were considered too crude, too ugly, or too cruel. But it was what happened next that truly broke the observers. The swarm began to adapt to the chemical weapons. It was slower this time. The constant switching had disrupted its learning cycle, forced it to split its adaptive resources across multiple simultaneous threats. But it was adapting. Given time, it would catch up. It always caught up. That was what made it unstoppable. Admiral Assant stood at the central tactical display, watching the data scroll past. His officers were feeding him updates every 30 seconds. Swarm's adaptation rate, its growth patterns, its movement vectors. He absorbed it all in silence, his eyes tracking something that only he could see. Then he turned to his chief tactical officer and said, "Scrap Doctrine 7. Switch to Doctrine 12, inverted formation, and deploy the ashfall packages on my mark." The tactical officer blinked. "Sir, Doctrine 7 is working. We're pushing them back. It won't be working in 20 minutes. Assant said, "The swarm is going to figure out our cycling pattern. It's already starting to predict the switch intervals. If we wait until it catches up, we lose the initiative, so we change everything now before it expects us to." Commander Torvin, who had been listening from his observer station, felt his blood go cold. He had spent his entire career fighting enemies who adapted. During battle, the standard response was to press harder with what worked until it stopped working, and then retreat to regroup. The Terran response was to abandon a winning strategy before the enemy could learn it and replace it with something entirely new, not out of desperation, out of anticipation. They were not reacting to the swarm. They were staying ahead of it. They were thinking like a predator chasing prey that could learn. And they were changing the chase faster than the prey could keep up. Doctrine 12 was something the conquered observers had never seen before. The Terran fleet broke apart into hundreds of tiny wolf pack groups, each one operating independently with no central coordination. They attacked the swarm from random vectors at random intervals, with random weapons loads. There was no pattern, no rhythm, no logic that the swarm could analyze and predict. Because there was no logic, that was the point. The Terrans had built an entire combat doctrine around being unpredictable, around feeding an adaptive enemy nothing but noise, giving it no signal to lock onto, no pattern to learn. The swarm faltered. For the first time in its million-year existence, it could not predict what was coming next. Its adaptive cycle spun uselessly, trying to build countermeasures for an attack pattern that did not exist. And while the swarm struggled to understand the chaos, the asphalt packages hit. They were not weapons in any conventional sense. They were clouds of microscopic machines, nanoscale devices that attached themselves to the swarm's biomechanical tissue and did something elegantly terrible. They didn't destroy. They corrupted. They fed the swarm false data through its own neural networks, making it see attacks that weren't there and miss attacks that were. They turned the swarm's greatest strength, its ability to adapt, into its greatest weakness. The Cathar swarm, the galaxy-eating nightmare that had consumed civilizations for 1,000,000 years, began to retreat. Torvin stood on the bridge of the remember everything and watched the Swarm pulled back, his claws were trembling not from fear of the swarm, from fear of the humans. He opened his personal log and recorded a single entry: the Terrans do not fight. Wars they hunt, and they are patient, creative, and utterly without mercy when the hunt begins. The swarm ran, the Terrans followed. They did not let up, they did not offer terms, they did not pause to celebrate or regroup, they pursued the retreating swarm with the same relentless focus that had defined every predator that had ever stalked the plains of Earth. And then the Jericho platforms fired from the Uit cloud across distances so vast that the signals took hours to arrive. 600 relativistic kill vehicles launched, they accelerated to a fraction of light speed, crossed the void silence, and struck the hyperspace corridors behind the fleeing swarm with the force of small stars. The corridors collapsed, the escape route sealed, the swarm was trapped. On the conclave station, Salith's broadcast cut out, the telepathic link was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of what she was feeling from the Terran crew. Not rage, not bloodlust, but something far more terrifying: focus. Absolute diamond hard, unshakable focus. Every human on that ship was operating with the calm precision of a surgeon cutting out a cancer. The Alandri representative on the conclave turned to his colleague from the Dominion of Cathar. His face was pale, his hands were shaking. "Now you understand the file," he whispered. "Now you understand why we wrote the clause. It was never to protect them from us, it was to protect us from them." The Cathar swarm did not die easily. Nothing that had survived for 1,000,000 years across the black emptiness between galaxies could be expected to simply give up, even trapped, even bleeding, even cut off from retreat. It fought with the mindless, desperate fury of a thing that had never once in its long existence faced the possibility of its own end. But the Terrans did not care how hard it fought, they cared only that it died. The final campaign lasted 3 years. 3 years of relentless, grinding, merciless pursuit through the shattered frontier systems and beyond the outer veil into the empty dark where the swarm had first come from. 3 years of hunting down every fragment, every splinter fleet, every dormant seed pod that the swarm had scattered across the void in a desperate attempt to preserve itself. The conquered begged the Terrans to stop after the first year, when the main body of the swarm had been broken and its ability to consume worlds had been destroyed. The High Conclave sent a formal request asking humanity to accept the victory and withdraw. The threat was over, they said. The galaxy was saved. There was no need to continue. Admiral Assayant read the request on the bridge of the Remember Everything. He looked tired. His hair had gone gray at the temples over the past year, and there were lines on his face that hadn't been there before. He set the message aside and dictated his response. "If even one fragment survives, it will adapt to everything we used. It will learn from its defeat. It will grow in silence somewhere in the dark for 1,000 or 10,000 years, and then it will come back. And when it does, it will be immune to every weapon, every tactic, and every trick that saved us this time. We finish this, or it was all for nothing." The Conclave did not send another request. The final fragment of the Kefi swarm was destroyed in a nameless system beyond the outer veil. And GT snorts. And GT, a dead star orbited by frozen rocks, where the last seed pod had buried itself deep inside an asteroid, dormant and waiting. A Terran scout squadron found it using detection methods that the Conquered's finest scientists didn't even understand. They cracked the asteroid open, burned the seed pod with plasma torches until nothing remained but glass and ash, and then burned the glass and ash again for good measure. When it was confirmed, truly confirmed, by every sensor and every scan and every analysis available, that the Kefi swarm was gone, Admiral Ascent sat down in his command chair and closed his eyes for a long time. When he opened them, he gave his final order of the war. All ships stand down. Set course for home. The galaxy took stock of what had happened, and the numbers were staggering. The Terran Defense Cooperative had lost 4,217 ships, over 2 million Terran soldiers. Sailors and officers had died, 2 million human beings, mothers, fathers, children, friends, lovers gone, burned, crushed, consumed, or lost in the void. The Conquered expected the Terrans to treat these losses the way most warrior species did, with pride, with honor, with songs of glory and monuments to victory. The Vrethki carved the names of their fallen into stone and celebrated their sacrifice with feasts. The Koth recorded their dead in crystal archives and spoke of them as heroes who had earned eternal glory. The Terrans did something different. They wept. Every ship in the Fenris fleet held a memorial service during the long voyage home. The ceremonies were quiet. There were no grand speeches, no celebrations. Crew members stood in cargo bays and mess halls and read the names of the dead aloud, every single name one by one, sometimes for hours. Some of them cried, some of them stood in silence. Some of them held each other and said nothing at all. Saleth, the Alundri telepath who had stayed aboard the Remember Everything for the entire campaign, felt the weight of their grief through her telepathic senses and had to be sedated. She later described it as the most overwhelming emotional experience of her 300-year life. They mourn the way they fight, she wrote in her final report, completely, without reservation, without limit. They gave everything they had to destroy the swarm, and now they are giving everything they have to grieve the ones they lost doing it. I have felt the emotions of 1,000 species, and I have never felt anything like this. They are broken and whole at the same time. They are proud and devastated. The same breath. I do not fully understand them. I am not sure anyone ever will. The Fenris fleet returned to Sol space, to a galaxy that no longer knew what to make of humanity. The species that had been dismissed as primitive children, that had been banned from warfare and patted on the head for 60 years, had just single-handedly destroyed an enemy that the combined might of the Conqueror's greatest civilizations could not even slow down. And they had done it not with superior technology or biology or ancient wisdom, but with something far simpler and far more terrifying, an absolute bone-deep refusal to lose. The High Conclave convened a special session. Every member species sent their highest representative. The Grand Assembly Hall was full for the first time in living memory, and the Conclave made an offer that had not been extended in over 10,000 years. They offered humanity a seat among the 12. It was the highest honor the Conquered could bestow, a seat at the table of the elder races, a voice in the governance of the galaxy. power, prestige, and recognition that humanity was not a child among the stars but an equal, perhaps even a superior. Ambassador Adiza Akafor stood before the assembly. She was older now. The war had aged her the way it had aged everyone, but her eyes were still clear, and her voice was still steady. "Thank you," she said. "The Terran people are honored by this offer, and we understand the weight of it." The assembly waited. "We decline." Silent, 4,000 species and not a sound. Humanity did not fight the Cathar. Swarm for power, Akafor said. "We did not fight for territory or prestige or a seat on your council. We fought because something was eating the galaxy and nobody else could stop it." She paused. "We do not want to rule the galaxy. We never did. We just wanted to make sure there was still a galaxy left to live in." She let that settle, and then she made one final request. "There is a classified file compiled by the Alandri Foresight Bureau 60 years ago. The file that led to the creation of the Terran clause. We have always known it existed. We would like it declassified, not for us, for everyone. The galaxy should know why we were really forbidden from war." The Alandri representative hesitated. Then she nodded. The file was released the following day. It spread across every world, every station, every ship in the Concord. Within hours, every species read it, and every species finally understood the key passage, the one that had terrified the 12 into banning humanity from warfare, was written in the dry, clinical language of intelligence analysis, but its meaning was anything but dry. It read, "Species Sol 3 does not possess superior technology, biology, or psionic capability. What it possesses is far more dangerous and evolutionary. History defined by continuous, unbroken conflict against environment, against clears throat predators, against disease, against each other. They have spent their entire biological existence at war. They do not approach warfare as a policy tool or a ritual of dominance. They approach it as a science, one they have refined with focused, terrifying dedication for over 10,000 years. They are not warriors in the way the conquered understands warriors. They are survivors who learned that the most reliable way to survive is to ensure that nothing which threatens them survives either. Recommendation: under no circumstances should they be given a reason to fight. The galaxy had given them a reason, and the galaxy had learned what happened next. In the years that followed, humanity settled back into its place in the conquered. They went back to their trade routes and their colonies and their ugly little ships. They attended every summit. They signed every treaty. They were polite and cooperative and friendly. But nothing was the same. The way other species looked at humans changed. There was respect now, real respect, not the condescending kind, but there was also something else: awareness, a quiet, instinctive caution, the kind that prey animals feel when they sense a predator nearby, even a sleeping one. The Vrethki, the proudest warriors in the galaxy, began inviting human officers to their military academies, not as students, as teachers. The Alandri, who had written the file that started it all, formally apologized to humanity for the Terran clause. Ambassador Akachi accepted the apology graciously and said she understood why they had done it. "You saw what we were," she said. "You weren't wrong to be afraid." On Earth, in Lagos, on a warm evening 6 Months after the fleet came home, Akachi stood on the balcony of her residence and watched the sun sink below the horizon. The sky was orange and gold, and the city hummed with life below her. Millions of people going about there. Business, living, laughing, building. Arguing, loving, grieving, being human. Her aide stepped onto the balcony. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Akachi smiled. It was a tired smile and a sad one and a proud one all at once. "We spent 60 years being told we were too dangerous to be trusted," she said. Quietly, she snorts watched the last edge of the sun disappear below the world. Turns out that was the nicest thing anyone has ever said about us. The stars came out above Lagos, one by one, somewhere out there beyond the atmosphere, beyond the moon, beyond the frozen edge of the solar system. The galaxy turned in its ancient endless circle, 4,000 species, a trillion worlds, an ocean of stars so vast that no mind could hold it all. And among them, on a small blue planet, orbiting an unremarkable yellow star, the wolves rested, not sleeping, never sleeping, just waiting the way they always did.